collection of ideas that's associated with the notion of divinity, okay? And then we'll turn back to the first lines when we start the next lecture. I have no idea how far I'm going to get through the biblical stories, by the way, because I'm trying to figure this out as I go along. Okay, so, you know, there's an idea in Christianity that the image of God is a trinity, right? There's the Father, there's the element of the Father, there's the element of the Son, and there's the element of the Holy Spirit. And it's something like tradition, the spirit of tradition. It's something like the human being as the newest incarnation of that tradition, like the living incarnation of that tradition. And then it's something like the spirit in people that makes relationship with this and this possible, the spirit in individuals. And so I'm going to bounce my way quickly through some of the classical metaphorical attributes of God.
Okay, what a blessing. It's going to give us this issue again, and I don't know why. I think everything else is closed down. Just bear with me a moment. What we can do is do a slower version of that recap, but we shouldn't. It's almost over here. All right, it's plugged in. Let's say a little prayer. Let's sacrifice a goat to the gods. See if this will start working. Can you all hear him?
So that we kind of have a cloud of notions about what we're talking about when we return to Genesis 1 and talk about the God who spoke chaos into being. So there's
Okay, it says video streaming quality results. Why are they down right now? They were up earlier. Okay. This is going to work. It usually does, but let's try.
There's a fatherly aspect. So here's what God as a father is like. You can enter into a covenant with it. So you can make a bargain with it. Now you think about that. Money is like that. Because money is a bargain you make with the future. Right? And so we've structured our world so that you can negotiate with the future. And I don't think that we would have got to the point where we could do that without having this idea to begin with. You can act as if the future is a reality. There's a spirit of tradition that enables you to act as if.
Okay, this is a bummer. It's just that the internet's not working as efficiently as it needs to right now. So I'm going to try a few more things to get this to work. Yeah, that didn't work. I don't know how jumpy it is for you, but I imagine it's even worse than for me because I get to have the video playing on the other tab. And so
the future is something that can be bargained with. That's why you make sacrifices, right? And the sacrifices were acted out for a very long period of time, and now they're psychological. We know that you can sacrifice something valuable in the present and expect that you're negotiating with something.
okay, cool. That's really pleasant. Maybe we're gonna have to pick a different time of day to do this. They're just putting in new fiber cables down everybody's road around here, so maybe we'll have faster internet soon. I didn't want to do this today. I wanted to do it next week after we finish this video, and it's almost to the end here. But what we could do is we could look at what he's talked about so far and talk about it a little slower. We just did this rapidly in the pre-conversation, so I won't bore everybody who's here by doing this all again. What a bummer. Any ideas? This stuff is endless. I mean, we can talk about this for sure. I really wanted to do this after we finish the first video, though, so I think we're going to remove that. Let's just give it another try and see if it wants to work now. Maybe if I put it on full screen.
Something that represents the transcendent future. And that's amazing human discovery. Like no other creature can do that, to act as if the future is real. to note that you can bargain with reality itself and that you can do it successfully. It's unbelievable. It responds to sacrifice. It answers prayers. I'm not saying that any of this is true, by the way. I'm just saying what the cloud of ideas represents. It punishes and rewards. It judges and forgives. It's not nature. You see, one of the things that's weird about the Judeo-Christian tradition is that God and nature are not the same thing at all. Whatever God is, partially manifest in this logos, is something that stands outside of nature. And I think that's something like consciousness as abstracted from the natural world. So it built Eden for mankind and then banished.
Okay. Why don't we all talk since we did in the pre-show, we had gone through those slides and talked about everything that he's covered so far. Why don't we have a discussion group for half an hour about what he hasn't gotten into the first verse yet. Um, okay, good. Elena, curious about Jordan Peterson. Now, if you guys use the comments instead of the private chat, I can actually take your question and put it up here on the screen for others to be able to read. I won't do that to what comment you just wrote because I'm not sure you want that. But if you copy paste it into the comments instead of the private chat part, it can happen. I'm curious about Peterson's thoughts on archetypes from Jung to biblical figures, what patterns he has acknowledged, and if he has pointed out the characterological traits. Okay, so he hasn't given us an exhaustive answer to those things at all. What he's doing in this first video, and again, we're not even to the first verses yet, but what he's doing in this first video is he's carving out the space for why this is an appropriate project and how we can approach it in a way that makes it appropriate and why people think it would be less valuable than it actually is. Okay. And so one of the things he brings up is Jung, and he brings up Jung's understanding of dreams and the language of art and archetypes, because what Jung is saying is that just like what Nietzsche was saying, which is that these things are so foundational, they make scientific thinking possible in the first place. And then you use scientific thinking against the notions of the stories that made it possible. And then what you're doing is you're just abolishing the ground on which you're standing. And he announces God has died and we've killed him. And he's saying, look, I'm not happy about that. What I'm trying to tell you is that you don't realize that your sanity and your ability to be rational was all based in things that are too deep to be articulated. Okay. They're in these stories. And what Jung is saying is that, yeah, the language of these stories is like, it's not like, it is the language of the dream world. And in your dream, you're getting impressions and images, but dreams can tell you things that you need to know. Okay, good. Let's put this up here. Thank you, Elena. Okay, so dreams can tell you about things that you need to know about yourself and what you're struggling with. Like you're being stupid in some way. But Freud thought that those dreams, it's like you know it. You already know it. You know it in a propositional form. You just don't want to admit it. You know that you have this sexual desire. It's like I desire X, Y, or Z. Like that's in you, but you don't want to think it, so you bury it, and then the dream cleverly dresses it up into like a dream form image, and so that it can kind of tell you what you need to know, and so you can look at it. What Jung is saying, I think I used the word Freud just now, I hope so. What Jung is saying is no, it's not like that. What the dream is communicating to you is things that are so deep and profound that you don't even know what they mean. The dream is doing its best to depict it to you in a language, since it doesn't have the logos language. Now in our class yesterday, Elena was bringing up the signifying and the symbolic, right, as two different languages available to humans. And I want to talk to you more about this, so I'll repeat it back to you a little bit now, and let's see if I got the first part of it right, which is that the soul has access to two things that were written into, like its access. They're both sort of revelatory in a sense. One is that it was written into us to be able to use logic and reason. You can think about the Kantian principles that make it possible. But then there's this other inspired revelatory language that comes to us. And the psychoanalysts, remember, this is the psychological significance of the biblical stories. The psychoanalysts have had this idea for a while, like, why don't we look at the dreams? Because you could tell yourself something that you need to know about who you are and the story that you're in and how to navigate it. So they look at dreams and they look at the images of the dreams. And Jung is looking at these images not as if they're arbitrary, but as if they contain within themselves the nature of the thing that is most fundamentally real, in a sense. And so Then Jung says, that's the language of art. The artists are like Einsteins. They're like genius dreamers. Okay. They're so good at dreaming that they can then depict the story that is at the base of reality, or the stories that are, and they can give it to us in a form where we can immediately experience it, because experiencing it is the only language. There's something phenomenological about this, right? The language of the dream is an image and impression. Okay, and dreams exist in a narrative structure. And so what Jung is saying is, okay, the artist is like a brilliant dreamer, right? If you listen to somebody tell you about their dream, it's often kind of boring, maybe. I don't tell people my dream, like, how interesting are dreams? But if you're a genius dreamer, well, now you're writing a play and people are going to sit and experience your dream. I've talked to some artists, and we're going to have one that we interview at some point, who taught. I asked her, like, how is it that you get in touch with the form? And it's very much like she tries to sort of let the subconscious, is the way. She doesn't know what she's doing. The artists don't know. But as I was asking her questions, it seemed like, and maybe I was leading her, so we'll have to do the interview and see. But um there's voices that are down there that want to be heard, and so by trying to shut off the other voices, this is how she was describing it. It's like it becomes louder until she suddenly sees it, and then the paintbrush moves. So this is why we talk about inspiration and the muses and things like that. It's like, okay, so you're a really genius dreamer. What if you're a genius of the genius dreamers? Okay, that's one way of conceptualizing the mythopoetic texts. All right. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, uh, the Greeks, the Hebrews, they're giving us a story of what it's like to be us, and also what the other things are like that are personal forces. It's all in that characterological story language, because that's the language of dream. But it's trying to make it clear to us where we are in the world and what kind of creatures we are and how we can navigate. So there's a literary component to this, but it's rooted from a Jungian perspective in sort of the forms that are written into you, that are not things that you cleverly came up with or that you decided to adopt or to affirm, my ideological perspective or my use of reason to be consistent within a worldview that I'm constructing. It's not that language, it's this other language. And so again, he starts out with Nietzsche for a reason. Nietzsche says, again, that's down there and it's the foundation, and you're demolishing it. You've gotten so clever up here that you're looking back and asking it to be a different language than it is, not recognizing the legitimacy of this other language. And because of that, you're dismissing and turning away from and ridiculing the most foundationally significant language of meaning that makes it possible, upon which you're resting. You can't do science. You can't think rationally without any of this stuff being organized. It's been at the base forever, but God is dead. All of that's crumbled, and you think you're going to continue with this stuff that was made possible by that? There's no way of doing it. And so this is part of Peterson's argument in the first video, to say we need to figure out what the appropriate way for approaching these stories is, so that the meaning can hit us, so that we can try to extract it. Now, of course, he's lecturing and he's doing psychology and he's doing philosophy and he's making arguments. Okay. So he's in that realm. So what is he doing? He's trying to, this he's explicitly saying, we're going to try to extract the meaning in approximate form, remembering that they're the kinds of things that can't be fully articulated. So they mean more than just what we're turning them into. But we're going to experience the stories. We're going to approach it with humility and expect that maybe it's the genius of the genius of the genius dream. This is a way of thinking about what's archetypal. And then the forms in it are the archetypes. But these things, um, have foundationally significant importance to us. And if we're not approaching it the right way, we might just throw it out. And then, as Nietzsche pointed out, once we throw it out, we'll realize, oh, we threw out the ground we were standing on, and now we can't even think rationally. Now insanity is coming. Now, you think science is going to keep going, everything's going to crumble. Okay. So there's a civilizational, there's a personal, psychological, there's a cultural reason for approaching these things that Peterson is making the case in this first video and saying, look, I'm going to be evolutionary about this. I'm going to be rational about this. I'm going to not be overly reductive, but he lists out the ways that he wants to approach this. Why? Because he's trying to put it into words. He's trying to comprehend approximately some of this meaning and benefit from it, even though it's like what we read about yesterday from Aquinas and what Socrates was talking about, which is like these are truths that are the nature of revelation. Remember, we read all about Aquinas saying it's right that there be revelation and it's right that we affirm it because it's a partial. What we can affirm is a partial reality of these greater truths. He was talking about exactly that in what we read yesterday, right? So, and Socrates was all over this. But when we do our interview with the artist, we're going to be reading Ion, and we're going to look at Socrates' conversation with an artist and helping him to understand that it is inspiration, it is revelation. So Peterson talks about how revelation could be a real thing, how the cosmos could have written things into us that are way deeply profound. About the Jungian archetypes, it's like saying, when you get to something that you can't push any further, that you can't get underneath, you found the base. It's basic in the sense of it's not reliant on anything. It's the fundamental ingredient of being, and that thing is a personality, right? It's like a way of being in the world. Remember, for Jung, you don't have ideas that you're unaware of. You have living. They want to keep living things with their own interests, psychological living things that make up you, their sub personalities. And Peterson talks about this briefly. He talks about it at length in other places, but we can talk about it. The Greek pantheon can be conceptualized in this psychological approach. It doesn't mean we reduce it to meaning just this, right? None of what Peterson is saying is we should reduce the Bible to only being interpreted in this way, right? There's history in there. There's philosophy in there. It might be that there's direct moral lessons in there. He says, we're not reading it that way. We're primarily reading it psychologically and literarily. And that's pretty damn profound. Let's read it in that way for the purpose of this course and see what we get out of it. I still haven't. Let's get back to what Elena wanted to talk about, which is, I mean, this is pretty exciting. I think you might agree that it's kind of exciting to be like, okay, I'm going to take the postmodern criticism, the scientism criticism. I'm going to take all of the perspectives that say you can't interpret a book anyway, or science is the right way of thinking, and to say, well, wait a minute, there's some great thinkers here who are telling us we're about to enter chaos like we've never imagined because we think we can just be rational and that doesn't have to be built on something, but it is built on something. It's built on something that we've been talking to ourselves and building our cultures, right? This is why I use that phrase. The stories that took hoop throwing, rock wielding apes and turned them into cathedral builders. It's like, wait a minute, we've been living off of this stuff without science. Okay? Science is a new thing in a sense, right? There's some scientific ideas. It's not like people weren't able to think that way, but science, modern science is a thing. But for 200,000 years, we've been of this is why he says, Nietzsche says, Christianity served the role of making us adults, of making us grow up as a species. So these stories are really profoundly significant. And I keep saying stories, and I can feel certain fundamentalist Christians going, I thought it was true. It's not just a story. Like you almost feel like just is right behind story. But the entire point of the Jungian approach of some of these great thinkers that he's bringing up is to say you've got it backwards. You've got it backwards. The formula that accurately describes what matter does is nothing like the language of narrative that tells you about what matters. Okay. And you live that way, whether you like to think you do or not. And we don't have to start from scratch to have a language for discussing how we deal with what is matter and and what actually matters. We are personalities, and this language means something to us. And if we throw all of that out and say, I'll remember why it's important to be scientific. No, you very fucking won't, is the idea, right? So far, we haven't finished this video. Maybe if we try it again, it'll stop. I don't know how much worse it is for you than it is for me, but it's clearly jumpy. Let's see.
Punished us for disobedience. It's too powerful to be touched. It granted free will. Distance from it is hell. Distance from it is death.
All right, we had some of these problems last time, but it went away. I'm really annoyed. I'm gonna have to look into this and see what I can do. I mean, I've got the Ethernet plugged right into the computer, so unfortunately, so that was his background, and now he's talking about the concept of God itself, which we were hoping to get into today and to cover. Um, However, since we're having these technical difficulties, and I don't think they're going to go away, we're going to unfortunately cut it a little short, and we'll just talk about what it is he's covered to carve out this space and the plan he has for what it is we might get out of a course like this and approaching the Bible this way. And then I'm really sorry about this, but we'll figure out how to finish this first video in the next one. Elena's made a suggestion in the private chat that I could make a subscription to YouTube and download it. So I'll do that. Whatever we do on Saturday, the damn video will work. It mostly worked for the first 5 sessions, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe AT&T is having another solar flare. Um, does anybody want to have our awesome discussions about all the stuff he's covered so far on the recording, or would you rather wait and do it? Should I just end the recording now and say, why don't we do this? We'll finish another 15 minutes since this is pretty short right now. We're only in it 20 minutes. And let's talk about Jung again. So Elena was asking about the archetypal. All right, yeah. So Jung's idea is that the dream is the birthplace of fully articulated ideas, right? So you can do philosophy and you can do science and you can try to understand the world in articulatable, propositional, formulaic ways. But before you even can do that, and what that rests upon is the language. It's a different kind of language. It's symbolic rather than signifying. It's the language of impression. It's the language of dream. And we were making cave paintings and little statues and building structures that told us about who we were architecturally when we walked into them. We were doing those types of things much more time than we've been doing science or even philosophy. And Nietzsche's insight was, yeah, that's what made those other things possible. What made it possible for us to start having like the revelatory moment where we can say, hey, I can write it down now, was that we were acting it out and we were meditating on the stories. And 99% of what we're doing today is still meditating on the stories. People who think they believe in things with evidence and that they believe in facts only and that they're little scientists walking around are completely absurd. Peterson makes the point. Scientists don't even think like scientists except when they're in the lab, sometimes if and hardly even there because they need the whole system of peer review to keep them on track. Right? So it's not easy to think scientifically. It doesn't mean we think scientific thinking isn't valuable. It's just not easy to do. And if you're under the impression that that's how you think, why did you go to Star Wars last week? Why do you rewatch The Matrix? What the fuck are you doing spending all your time in this language of image and art and narrative? That's the language that actually speaks to you. And there's a way of approaching it. Now, he also brings up a challenge to that from the postmoderns, the postmodernists. So we could go and take a look at that and this was really cool. This image, Mark really liked this. I really like this too. This is the first hyperlinked book, he says, the Bible. These are all of the cross references of every single verse to each other within the Bible. And so you could say, well, okay, how are you going to get a full understanding of that? You could take a billion paths through that and not even have like a 1% of 1% of the possible paths that you could take. Combinatorics means that this thing is infinite, just from the limited thing we're looking at now. Okay. So yeah, so in the literary part of the approach, the challenge, one of the other challenges, not from the scientismists, but from the postmodernist idea, is that look, you can interpret a book billions of ways. There's like an infinite number of ways a book could be interpreted. So how can you ever say that there's a right way to interpret a book? Hey, this applies to the world of facts too. The world that you're living in is chaotic in a sense because you could be focused on things that are not what you're focused on, and you'd find a whole new world to be obsessed with for your measly 80 years of life, right? Like why are we focused on what we're focused on and how can we justify that? None of that comes through the microscope or the telescope. None of that comes from the world of facts. We have to have some other solution to it. But the postmodernists stop at the problem and they say, therefore, stop thinking there's meaning there because you're never going to get to it. It's like, well, wait a minute. What's a response to that? We got to carve out space for how it would be worthwhile to do this approach. Are we just making up whatever interpretation of the story that we feel works for us and somebody else has a different one and we can't really say we're getting it right or even getting any aspect of it right? Right? That's the postmodernist response and assumption about any course that would say, hey, let's go look at the Bible stories. Okay. What if you had a standard for attempting the interpretive project again? That's what we're going to need. You can judge the outcomes of the various attempts to distinguish between their better or worse interpretations if you had something like that. You are looking for sufficient order and directions for in your stories. It's bringing you into this, right? You're in the universe. The scientific perspective is I'm outside the universe. I've made an object of everything that's external to me. That's not even working with the latest scientific discoveries, right? It's like the act of observing is disturbing the observed. We can't get that actual pure objectivist perspective. We can fictionally pretend to have it and approximate it, but we're not really there. It doesn't mean that science isn't valid. It's really great, but it's based in a fiction too, and it doesn't get to call other fictions fictional and feel superior for that reason. You are looking for sufficient order and directions in your stories. Okay. You're not just interpreting it as a robot or an AI or something. You have a life and you're trying to get from point A to point B. This is the pragmatist idea, right? A map which gets you to your destination without leading you into a pit is a better map than one which fails on these fronts. All right. Now, if we're allowed to be a subject of what we're doing here, being characters who are approaching the stories as if it matters for our lives, now we've got a set of standards again to say, hey, your interpretation of Hamlet was to eat grass and never speak again, or shoot yourself in the head. How'd that work out for you? Not according to what I think you should care about, but according to what you have to care about to want to interpret it in the first place. So we're not even imposing the standard of what should be valued here. What we're saying is if somebody wants to approach trying to interpret a story, they're bringing to it aims. And then you can judge whether or not their interpretation of the story worked well or badly for their aims. They were trying to get to point B, but they fell in a pit. They were trying to get to a destination of maybe having the highest principle to be motivated by, or maybe not suffering unnecessarily, or maybe being content or even happy with life. Like whatever your aim is that you're looking for, we can use that as the standard for whether or not your interpretive method of the story was a good one or not, right? Okay, so it's embracing the problem that the postmodernists point out. It's not denying it, but it's saying, well, we can use a standard here to make sense of stories. And when we approach the Bible as literature and as narrative, that's what we're going to be doing, and we have a right to do that. Um, Probably what we're going to do is call it quits here and just go talk about these things since nobody is interrupting to talk right now. So we'll end the live stream early. I'm really sorry about that. We usually try to do 45 minutes to an hour and a half of getting through some of Jordan Peterson's video. We were supposed to finish the first video today, but it's just looks like it's not going to happen. I'll have it downloaded or some other source for making it work. Quick question. You can hear me without breaks and problems, right? So it's really just the fact that we're trying to play the video through a stream while streaming, right?
It's just the video.
Yeah, okay. So if I have it downloaded, then that won't be using any bandwidth. So next time, we really were planning on finishing this today and then doing a recap of everything. We sort of did a half of a recap of the first part of what he did today. We'll do the recap of the second part after we watch the video. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to watch the video next time. I'm really bummed out about that, and sorry if that's disappointing. But let's go into the unrecorded after conversation. Let's talk about all these things and the rest of what he's covered so far. And then next week, we'll make sure that this doesn't happen again as we move forward. So there's a learning curve for me, and technology is sometimes problematic, but we'll say goodbye to anybody else who's watching, and we'll end it there.